الحمد لله وكفى والسلام على عباده الذين اصطفى أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والذين جاهدوا فينا لنهدينهم سبلنا سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون والسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم. Over the last few weeks I've been sharing some of the remembrances of a few days that I was able to spend in the company of Shaykh Zulfikar. And in particular, as I've mentioned, I'm sorry for not being present for the last 2 weeks. I had family engagements, but prior to that, I had mentioned that I was able to join him on a trip to Barbados, and I was sharing some of the recollections of that trip. When I first arrived in Barbados, as I mentioned, met some of the ulama in Barbados, and I happened to be picked up by one of the ulama of Barbados, and he drove us to the house where Hazrat was staying. And when we got to that house, there was a meal prepared for us, and we had our meal. And after we had our meal, as I've already mentioned, we were awaiting to see if we would get an opportunity to meet with Shaykh Zulfikar. We didn't get an opportunity that night, but we did have the opportunity to meet with one of the people that was traveling with Shaykh Zulfikar, who was Mufti Kamal. And I've mentioned Mufti Kamal's name in many gatherings in the past. He was fortunate enough to be traveling with Shaykh Zulfikar during the entire trip through the Caribbean, and in fact, he had accompanied him from England all the way to the Caribbean and all the way back. So he had a really great opportunity to be able to observe what was happening throughout the trip to the Caribbean. One of the things that we try to do when we meet people who are traveling with Shaykh Zulfikar is we in general, but I always like to ask them, tell me, what did you get from all of the days that I missed? This is actually a sunnah of the companions as well. It's originating from the sunnah of the companions, radiyallahu anhum wa radu an. When they would be present in company of the Prophet ﷺ, they would be focused on what they were gaining from the Prophet ﷺ. But when they would be away, they wouldn't be oblivious. Meaning, if they were away, it wasn't that the gatherings didn't exist. They knew the gatherings were occurring, and they would come back, and then they would ask if anybody had gained anything or what people had gained, and then they would gather the information in that way. And we know that it's established. It's established that the companions would do this. So if a companion couldn't be present for a particular time and there was a gathering that they missed, they would come back and they would ask, what did the Prophet ﷺ say, etc., etc. And so they would benefit in this way as well. And this is something that we should learn from, because we can't be everywhere all the time. So and it's not that when we're not there, the world stops. I know we like to think that when the world's, if I'm not there, the world isn't there, but I can guarantee you the day you pass away, the newspaper will come out the next day. It's not that the whole world revolves around us. So when we're not present somewhere, there is still tremendous benefit that may be occurring. It's just that we missed it. So when people are present and we are absent, we should also ask them what they gained. And often you can benefit tremendously from that. So when I saw Mufti Kamal, we met and we greeted each other, and then I said to him, I said, look, tell me what did you get? So open up your notebook, because he also keeps a notebook, and he had taken notes, and I said, tell me, what were the major things that you learned? So he began to relay some of the major points of the journey, and he actually had been accompanying Shaykh Zulfikar throughout the UK as well, so he had a good 1 month solid dose. And in that period of time, there were many things that he must have observed and must have learned. But it's interesting, we didn't get the opportunity to interact and sit and talk the way we would like to, and it often happens that way. But there were a few things that he shared with me, maybe 5 or 10, that I actually got to write in the downtime. And the first one, or one of the very first things that he shared with me, and the one that sort of stuck with me all the way until now, and I don't have my notebook in front of me, but the one that sort of stuck in my mind, and I keep repeating it to myself, and I wanted to repeat it to everyone here as well, is that he said one of the major points that Shaykh Zulfikar had made throughout the Caribbean trip was this notion that we should never rely on our nafs. We should never rely on our nafs. Okay, so what does that mean? That requires a little bit of explanation. Let's just take a step back. I'm going to add my own words here. When something is going to be stressed, or when you're going to place a stress on something, you can do tests to determine how much stress that thing can handle. All right, for example, if you look at biomedical engineering, they create artificial joints. And when they create artificial joints, they know that the purpose of those joints is to place them in human beings, and human beings are going to generate a certain stress on that joint. And so they'll test the joint, the artificial joint, outside of the human. They'll, through engineering tests, they'll test the joint to see how much load it can bear, how many times it can bend, how much it can take before it gets distorted. I'll give you another example. I happen to be in this store, and maybe a week ago, and I was looking at a cabinet, and they were advertising that this cabinet can be opened X number of times per day over so many years, and nothing will go wrong with the mechanism by which this cabinet will be opened. And they have this little robotic arm opening and closing the cabinet in glass encasement, and they keep showing that it's being opened, closed, open, close, and it's been running like that for how many years, who knows. I just happen to see it. But again, what are they saying, or what are they trying to prove? They're trying to prove that this mechanism by which the cabinet is put together is able to bear a certain stress. And based on testing, it can bear this much stress. And this occurs in everything. When you want to build a home, one of the very first things that occurs when a person wants to build a home is that they take a little bit of the soil and they do something called a soil test. And the purpose of the soil test, again, is to determine how much weight can that soil bear before you put a structure on it, because every ground can only bear X amount of weight. And so you certainly want to put much less than what the maximum capacity is on top of that particular piece of ground. So everything has a certain stress that it can handle. And what we're being told in this piece of advice given by Shaykh Zulfikar is that don't rely on the nafs at all. Yani, don't even think that you can stress the nafs at all, because if you stress the nafs, it'll end up cracking. So don't think that you can do any reliance upon our nafs. Now, just as an example, human beings have weaknesses, and we are human beings, and we all have weaknesses. If we challenge our nafs, we will rarely win. So the wisdom in dealing with the nafs is not how can I strengthen the nafs so that I can challenge it. It's not designed to bear stress. The wisdom in the case of the nafs is how can I avoid the stress completely. You understand, right? It's not a question of what can I do to build up my nafs so that I can succeed in the stress test. It's actually looked at the other way, which is don't stress the nafs at all, because it's not designed to carry any weight. It'll crack if you try to stress it. Just as an example, I'll give you a couple of quick examples. One quick example. When the prohibition for alcohol came upon the community, the Sahaba gave up alcohol right away. There was no question. For them, whatever was revealed was immediately acted upon, whether it came as Quran or whether it came as Hadith. But interestingly, even though the companions completely gave up alcohol, the Prophet ﷺ commanded the companions to break the glasses from which they used to drink alcohol. Right? There were certain glasses that they used as part of their tradition and culture, and they used to drink alcohol from those glasses. And we know very clearly that the Prophet ﷺ commanded them to break the glasses from which they used to drink the alcohol. Now you think, why? It doesn't make any sense. They've already given up the alcohol. They weren't going to go back to it. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given them that hikmah and that tawfiq. But why would the Prophet ﷺ command them to break the glasses that they used to drink the alcohol from? And the answer is because if those glasses are present, the possibility of remembering that they had drank the alcohol was there. And the nafs cannot even bear that much stress. The nafs cannot even bear that much stress. So the solution when dealing with the nafs is to completely, to the best of our abilities, eliminate the stress. And if we eliminate the stress, then the nafs has a good chance of surviving. So again, the secret of the nafs is not how can I strengthen my nafs so that it survives every stress. The secret of succeeding with the nafs is, how can I avoid the environment? Let me make the best circumstance by which I can avoid the environment so that I never stress the nafs to begin with. If the nafs has a problem with looking at things that it shouldn't look at, all right, let's say it has a problem with looking at the opposite gender, the solution isn't to increase the dhikr to the extent that you can then go and stand on the beach. That's not the solution. The solution is to avoid the environment completely so that we don't stress the nafs, because if we stress the nafs, we'll slip. Similarly, if a person's nafs has a problem in dealing with backbiting, just as an example, then the solution isn't to sit in the environment of backbiting but bite the tongue. Sure, if it happens to come up, you have to bite the tongue, but the real solution lies in avoiding the environment, because the nafs cannot bear that stress. And anyone who puts themselves in that circumstance will ultimately succumb to that stress and will do things that they wouldn't be proud of. So when we see, especially with the month of Ramadan coming up, when we see that we have a problem, right? Any problem, whether it be lying, misuse of the gaze, misuse of the tongue, misuse of the hands, etc. When we see that we have a problem, the solution lies in identifying how to eliminate that stress completely. How can we change our environment so that we can eliminate that stress completely? Now, will it be possible to eliminate every stress? No. But can we eliminate 95% of the issues? Yes. The other 5% you have to deal with. It's part of being in the dunya. You can't avoid it. And the sunnah and regular dhikr and purification through the masjid and purification through the company of good people, and all of that is a relatively good way of protecting the nafs from those circumstances. But we certainly shouldn't stress the nafs at all. So this one piece of advice, look, I just got one sentence. He just shared one sentence and one example. That Shaykh Zulfikar said, don't stress the nafs, don't rely on the nafs at all. And this example of the breaking of the glasses from which the alcohol was consumed. From those two things, there's so much that we can learn. And this is the wisdom of the Mashaykh. Now, I didn't hear it. Now, I'm sharing you what I learned from the trip, okay? But I didn't hear this directly from the tongue of Shaykh Zulfikar. I heard this from the person who heard it from the tongue of Shaykh Zulfikar. But even in that lies benefit. So basically two lessons. Number one, when we come in the company of people that spend time in the company of the pious, we should sit with them, we should ask them, we should take benefit from them. We should specifically say, you were there for this much time, share with me 2-3 points that you learned, because maybe I can take some benefit from it. And often, it may even be more beneficial than directly hearing it from the person, because of the effort that was made and because it's a sunnah as well. Companions, because Sahaba radiallahu anhum used to do it, so we should do it as well. Of course, there's always barakah in the sunnah. And the second point is that we should be particularly cognizant of the fact that the nafs is not designed to take heavy stress. And if we place it in the circumstance of heavy stress, it's not that the nafs will survive, will fail. You might be able to get away on occasion with a rare exception. Some of it out of necessity due to work or school or other things that we have to do in our daily routine. But for the most part, we should be particularly fearful of stressing the nafs at all, because it cracks. It's like an egg. When you grab an egg, you're so careful because you know that it's going to break if you just mishandle it in the slightest way. So in the same way, the nafs is easily cracked, and then we end up falling down a very slippery slope. So we should be very particular. And when we understand that this is a characteristic of the nafs, then it allows us to make important decisions that would be beneficial for us in our avoiding sin and our progression towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So those were the two things that I wanted to share. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us the tawfiq to be able to sit in the company of the pious, and to also sit in the company of those people that sit in the company of the pious. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us the wisdom to avoid stressing the nafs even in the slightest way. Wa akhirat da'wana anil hamdulillahi rabbil alameen.